The sound of the gavel echoed sharply through the tense air of the Detroit courtroom. All eyes were fixed on Judge Alvin Carter, a man known for his firm rulings and unwavering stance on justice. He wasn't the type to be swayed by pleas or emotions. He believed in the law, in evidence, and in punishment as a means of maintaining order. At the defendant's table stood Darrell Thompson, a 26-year-old mechanic with a determined but weary look in his eyes. His hands gripped the table so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Was this young man truly guilty? The question might have crossed some minds, but to the jury and the case files, Darrell was already condemned from the moment he was arrested. The evidence against him seemed undeniable, or at least it was made to appear that way. A grainy surveillance video showing someone with a similar build running from the crime scene. A witness who claimed to have seen Darrell near the area on the night of the incident. Fingerprints allegedly found on the weapon used in the crime. An anonymous phone call tipping off the police that Darrell was the mastermind. "Defendant!" Alvin's deep voice cut through the murmurs in the courtroom. "Do you have anything to say before I issue my ruling?" Darrell took a deep breath. This was his last chance. "Your Honor," his voice was steady though there was a slight tremble. "I didn't do this. I wasn't there that day. I was set up." A ripple of whispers spread through the room. His mother, seated at the back, covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. But Alvin didn't allow emotions to cloud his judgment. Evidence mattered more than tears. "Darrell Thompson," Alvin's voice remained firm, "you have been found guilty by a jury of your peers, and by the law, I have no choice." He paused for a moment before delivering the final blow. "I hereby sentence you to 70 years in prison without parole." Darrell's mother broke into uncontrollable sobs. The room filled with gasps, heads bowed in sorrow, and the frantic scribbling of reporters capturing every word, but Darrell himself remained motionless. His face was unreadable, but his eyes darkened, as if he had just realized a painful truth. Justice doesn't always belong to the innocent. From his seat on the bench, Judge Alvin Carter felt a sense of closure. He had done his duty. But what he didn't know was that a buried truth was about to resurface, one that would change everything. Alvin Carter leaned back in his chair, staring at the piles of case files scattered across his desk. The 70-year sentence for Darrell Thompson had officially closed a case that seemed airtight, but deep in his gut, something felt off. As a seasoned judge, Alvin had delivered countless verdicts. He had always believed in the integrity of the system, in the weight of evidence, and in the finality of justice. Yet, this time, an unshakable sense of unease gnawed at him. Flipping through a stack of documents from an unrelated robbery case, his eyes landed on a particular evidence log. It listed a firearm that had been confiscated in an arrest 2 days after the robbery Darrell was convicted of. At first it seemed irrelevant, until he noticed the details. Weapon type, Glock 17. Serial number 4528 LT. Distinctive markings on the barrel, identical to the gun used in Darrell's case. Alvin frowned. How could the same gun appear in 2 separate cases? His heart pounded as he checked the serial number of the weapon supposedly used by Darrell. A wave of cold realization swept over him. It was an exact match. "This can't be right," he muttered under his breath. If this gun had been seized 2 days after the jewelry store robbery, then how could it have been presented as the murder weapon in Darrell's trial? The implications were staggering. The evidence had been manipulated. Alvin's grip tightened on the folder. If the gun was never at the crime scene, then how did Darrell's fingerprints end up on it? If someone had planted false evidence, who was behind it? He knew he couldn't ignore this, and he knew exactly who could help him get to the bottom of it. Baron Tate, a veteran investigator with a reputation for uncovering the truth. Alvin reached for his phone, his fingers slightly unsteady. He knew that pursuing this truth could cost him everything, his career, his reputation, maybe even his safety. But if he let it go, an innocent man would spend the rest of his life behind bars for a crime he didn't commit. There was no choice to make. Alvin had to find the truth no matter the cost. Alvin Carter sat in a dimly lit cafe, the soft hum of conversation around him barely registering in his mind. Across from him sat Baron Tate, a former investigator with sharp instincts and an unshakable sense of justice. This wasn't just a case of wrongful conviction, this was a setup. Alvin slid a case file across the table. "I need you to take a look at this. I think Darrell was framed." Baron picked up the file, flipping through the pages. His brows furrowed as he reached the evidence report detailing the Glock 17, the supposed murder weapon in Darrell's case. His jaw tightened. "Damn it," he muttered. "This gun never should have been presented in Darrell's trial. If it was already confiscated in another case, someone tampered with the evidence." The deeper they dug, the more cracks appeared in the case against Darrell. A key witness originally identified a different suspect, but later changed their statement to implicate Darrell. The anonymous tip that led to Darrell's arrest wasn't from a random citizen. It was from a burner phone registered to Detective Beavis Langley, the lead investigator in the case. A previously unseen surveillance video from a parking lot near the crime scene showed a man matching Beavis Langley's description leaving the area with a duffel bag, one that resembled the bag used in the robbery. "This isn't just an accident," Baron said, his voice low and grim. "Langley didn't just make a mistake, he orchestrated this entire thing." Alvin felt a chill run down his spine. "Why? What does he gain from framing Darrell?" Baron exhaled sharply. "That's what we need to find out. But if Langley is willing to plant evidence and manipulate witnesses, he's covering for something bigger." They tracked down the witness, who changed his testimony. At first, he was reluctant to talk, but when Baron mentioned Beavis Langley's name, the man visibly tensed and swallowed hard. "I didn't want to do it," he whispered, his hands shaking. "But Langley pressured me," he said. "If I didn't back his version of the story, I'd be arrested for obstruction. I had no choice." Alvin and Baron exchanged a look. This wasn't just a wrongful conviction. It was a deliberate cover-up, orchestrated by the very people sworn to uphold justice. Alvin clenched his fists. They weren't just uncovering a mistake. They were exposing a beast that had been hiding in plain sight. And it wasn't going to go down without a fight. Alvin Carter stepped out of the courthouse, the warm Detroit afternoon casting long shadows across the pavement. The truth was clear now. Darrell had been framed, and Beavis Langley wasn't just a corrupt cop. He was part of something much bigger. Bringing this to light would mean going up against a system that had protected men like Langley for years. Alvin knew the risks, but he never expected them to come so quickly. That night, as he locked up his office, a folded note was slipped under his door. The moment he picked it up, his stomach tightened. The message was written in jagged, hurried handwriting. "Walk away, Carter. You have no idea what you're getting into." A bad feeling crept into his chest. But the real shock came when he stepped into the parking lot. His car had been completely trashed. The windows were shattered, the tires slashed, and a knife had been stabbed into the driver's seat. Taped to the blade was another note. "Next time, it won't just be your car." Alvin tightened his jaw. Fear was the intended message, but all it did was fuel his determination. Meanwhile, Baron Tate wasn't safe either. Driving home that evening, he noticed a black SUV trailing him. At first, he brushed it off as a coincidence, but when he took an unexpected turn and the SUV followed, his instincts screamed danger. Then, without warning, the SUV sped up. Baron barely had time to react before the vehicle swerved toward him, trying to run him off the road. His survival instincts kicked in. He yanked the steering wheel to the right, skidding onto the sidewalk, crashing into a barrier. The SUV didn't stop. It vanished into the night. Sitting in his wrecked car, heart pounding, adrenaline surging, bringing this to light would mean going up against a system that had protected men like Langley for years. Alvin knew the risks, but he never expected them to come so quickly. That night, as he locked up his office, a folded note was slipped under his door. The moment he picked it up, his stomach tightened. The message was written in jagged, hurried handwriting. "Walk away, Carter. You have no idea what you're getting into." A bad feeling crept into his chest, but the real shock came when he stepped into the parking lot. His car had been completely trashed. The windows were shattered, the tires slashed, and a knife had been stabbed into the driver's seat. Taped to the blade was another note. "Next time, it won't just be your car." Alvin tightened his jaw. Fear was the intended message, but all it did was fuel his determination. Meanwhile, Baron Tate wasn't safe either. Driving home that evening, he noticed a black SUV trailing him. At first, he brushed it off as a coincidence, but when he took an unexpected turn and the SUV followed, his instincts screamed danger. Then, without warning, the SUV sped up. Baron barely had time to react before the vehicle swerved toward him, trying to run him off the road. His survival instincts kicked in. He yanked the steering wheel to the right, skidding onto the sidewalk, crashing into a barrier. The SUV didn't stop. It vanished into the night. Sitting in his wrecked car, heart pounding, Baron exhaled sharply. "They're trying to kill us." The next morning, Alvin officially filed a motion to reopen Daryl's case. News leaked fast. Headlines exploded across the city. Judge Carter challenges corrupt system, demanding retrial for convicted felon. That evening his phone rang. A deep, unfamiliar voice crackled through the speaker. "You really think you can win this, Carter? The system was here before you and it'll be here after you. Walk away while you still can." Alvin gripped the phone tighter. "I don't care how long it's been here," he said coldly. "If the system is broken, I'll tear it down myself." The war had begun, and there was no turning back. The courtroom was packed. Journalists fought for the best angles, their cameras flashing as Judge Alvin Carter took his seat. This was no ordinary hearing. It was a reckoning. Alvin wasn't just reopening Daryl Thompson's case. He was exposing a system that had been corrupted for years. Across the room, Detective Beavis Langley sat with his attorney, his expression calm, almost smug. He didn't look nervous. He believed the system would protect him, just like it always had. But today, Alvin had something Langley didn't expect: undeniable proof. Baron Tate took the witness stand. He pulled up a screen and played a security camera recording from the parking lot near the crime scene. As the footage rolled, the courtroom fell silent. On the screen, a tall man matching Bevis Langley's build was seen leaving the scene carrying a duffel bag, the same kind of bag used in the robbery. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "Order!" Alvin struck the gavel. His eyes locked onto Langley. "Detective Langley, do you have an explanation for this?" Langley's jaw clenched. For the first time, his confidence wavered. Next, a key witness took the stand, the man who had changed his testimony during Daryl's original trial. His hands trembled as he spoke. "I lied in the first trial. I didn't want to, but Langley forced me. He said if I didn't say it was Daryl, I'd be charged with obstruction." Langley shot to his feet. "This is nonsense," he shouted. "They are trying to frame me." Alvin calmly flipped through a stack of documents. Then he delivered the final blow. "We've traced the anonymous tip that led to Daryl's arrest. The phone number was registered to you, Detective Langley. Care to explain that?" Langley's face drained of color. He had no way out. Alvin stood. "Based on the overwhelming new evidence, I hereby overturn Daryl Thompson's conviction." The room erupted. Cheers and applause filled the air. Daryl sat frozen in disbelief. He was free. From the back of the courtroom, his mother sobbed with joy, rushing forward to embrace him. Meanwhile, officers approached Langley. He resisted, but it was over. As they hauled him away in handcuffs, he glared at Alvin. "You don't know what you've started, Carter." Alvin met his gaze without flinching. "We'll see who's left standing in the end." The prison gates creaked open, sunlight spilling onto the cold, concrete ground. Daryl Thompson stepped out, a free man for the first time in 3 years. His heart pounded as he scanned the crowd. And then he saw her. His mother stood at the edge of the sidewalk, tears streaming down her face. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. She just ran forward and wrapped her arms around him, sobbing into his chest. Daryl closed his eyes, holding her tight. 3 years of waiting, of fighting, of hoping, and now, at last, justice had prevailed. From a short distance away, Judge Alvin Carter watched the scene in silence. He had seen moments like this before, but never one that weighed on him this heavily. Never one that made him question everything. Daryl turned to face him. His expression wasn't filled with anger or bitterness, only gratitude and determination. "Thank you, Judge Carter. Without you, I wouldn't be standing here today." Alvin nodded. "I only did what was right. But that doesn't erase what you've been through. The only thing I can say is, I'm sorry." Darrow held his gaze. "Then help me make sure this never happens to anyone else." Alvin exhaled. That was the real question, wasn't it? On the other side of town, Beavis Langley was no longer untouchable. He faced a long list of charges: tampering with evidence, witness intimidation, abuse of power. But Alvin knew better than to believe that one arrest would fix a broken system. The media exploded with headlines. "Judge Carter takes on corrupt system. The trial that shook the nation." Daryl Thompson's Fight for Freedom: How the Justice System Betrayed an Innocent Man. But Alvin didn't care about the cameras or the articles. He had lost colleagues over this. He had received threats, and there were moments, dark, quiet moments, where he wondered if he had just made himself a target for something bigger. Then he looked back at Daryl and his mother, embracing on the prison steps. And he knew he had done the right thing. But one question still haunted him. If Langley could manipulate one case this easily, how many others were still sitting behind bars for crimes they never committed? Baron Tate stepped up beside him, resting a hand on his shoulder. "We can't save everyone, but we can start here." Alvin nodded. The fight wasn't over, not even close. That morning, Alvin Carter stood at the steps of the courthouse, staring up at the old stone pillars he had walked through for more than 3 decades. This place had seen countless verdicts, determined countless fates, some deserved, some not. And today, he understood better than ever before that the system wasn't flawless. It could be manipulated. It could be weaponized. And if no one fought back, innocent people like Daryl Thompson would continue to be swallowed by it. But today, justice had won. Daryl's story spread like wildfire. His wrongful conviction became a symbol for those still trapped in the system. Human rights organizations called for reform. Tough questions were being asked. How many people like Daryl are still sitting in prison for crimes they didn't commit? How much evidence has been fabricated, twisted, or buried to serve corrupt interests? Is the system designed to protect justice or to protect the people in power? But justice came at a price. Alvin was no longer a hero in the eyes of everyone. He had lost allies in the legal world. Some fellow judges distanced themselves, whispering behind closed doors. "You think you took down one bad cop, there are dozens more. What happens when they turn their sights on you?" Baron Tate, standing beside him, gave a small chuckle. "They want you to be scared. They want you to back down." Alvin exhaled, a tired but determined smile forming. "I'm not backing down. I'm just thinking, where do we start next?" Baron smirked, then gestured to the crowd of journalists waiting below. "I think we just did." Alvin took a step forward, walking down the courthouse steps as reporters fired off questions, cameras flashing in his face. He didn't care about the attention. He only cared about the work that lay ahead. Because out there were more Daryls. More people waiting for someone to believe in them. More innocent men and women locked away, lost in the cracks of a system built on power, not truth. And as long as Alvin Carter had breath in his lungs, he wasn't done fighting. Justice is not just written in laws. It lies in the courage of those who dare to stand up for the truth. The system can fail, and if no one fights back, it will continue to crush the innocent. Daryl Thompson's story is a reminder that one person can be wrongfully convicted, but a silent society is the greatest injustice of all. Change doesn't come from criticism alone. It requires action, bravery, and an unwavering commitment to fighting against corruption. Because true justice isn't just about verdicts. It's about making sure the innocent never have to fight alone.